George Washington, a man first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen, was an American politician and soldier who served as the first president of the United States and was one of the founding fathers of America. He served as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolution and later presided over the convention that drafted the United States Constitution. He is considered the driving force behind the nation's establishment and came to be known as the father of the country, both during his lifetime and to this day. Washington was born into the provincial gentry of colonial Virginia, the first child of Augustine Washington and his second wife, Mary Ball Washington, who owned tobacco plantations and slaves, which he inherited. Washington was of primarily English gentry descent, especially from Mulgrave, England. His great-grandfather John Washington emigrated to Virginia in 1656 and began accumulating land and slaves, as did his son Lawrence and his grandson Augustine, the father of George Washington. Washington began his first career as a surveyor. He subsequently received a commission and surveyor's license from the College of William and Mary and became the official surveyor for the newly formed Culpeper County. He was appointed to this well-paid official position thanks to his brother Lawrence's connection to the prominent Fairfax family. He completed his first survey in less than 2 days, plotting a 400-acre parcel of land, and was well on his way to a promising career. He was subsequently able to purchase land in the Shenandoah Valley, the first of his many land acquisitions in Western Virginia. Washington began his military service in the French and Indian War as a major in the militia of the British province of Virginia. In his post, he was sent as an ambassador from the British Crown to the French officials and Indians as far north as present-day Erie, Pennsylvania. Competing French interests in the region, coupled with territorial claims by Virginia and Pennsylvania, led to a war in the colonies called the French and Indian War, and contributed to the start of the global 7 Years' War between England and France, which was the first true world war having been fought in all corners of their colonial empires. 6 years later, Washington married the wealthy widow Martha Dandridge Custis. Washington's marriage to Martha greatly increased his property holdings and social standing, and made him one of Virginia's wealthiest men. As a respected military hero and large landowner, he held local office and was elected to the Virginia Provincial Legislature, representing Frederick County in the House of Burgesses for 7 years. Washington steadily grew more politically active and anti-British despite all the imported goods he enjoyed, by presenting the Virginia Assembly with legislation to ban the importation of goods from Great Britain. Washington played a leading military and political role in the American Revolution when he first took political stands against the various acts of the British Parliament. He opposed the Stamp Act, the first direct tax on the colonies imposed by the British Parliament, which included no representatives from the colonies. He began taking a leading role in the growing colonial resistance when protests became widespread against the Townshend Acts. He introduced a proposal, drafted by his friend George Mason, calling for Virginia to boycott English goods until the acts were repealed. The British Crown would not tolerate insurrection from its colonies, and troops were sent to occupy Boston and close the harbor to all trade. This led to the battles of Lexington and Concord near Boston, which all but started the American Revolution against British rule, and Washington appeared at the Second Continental Congress in a military uniform, signaling that he was prepared for war. He had the prestige, experience, charisma, and bearing of a military leader, and was known as a strong patriot. Virginia was the largest colony and deserved recognition, and New England, where the fighting began, realized that it needed Southern support to win the war. The Second Continental Congress then commissioned him as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army in the American Revolution. In that command, Washington managed to force the British out of Boston, but was defeated and nearly captured later that year when he lost New York City. After crossing the Delaware River in the middle of winter on that night of Christmas Day, he defeated the British in the battles of Trenton and Princeton, retook New Jersey, and restored momentum to the rebel cause. His strategy enabled Continental forces to capture two major British armies at Saratoga and Yorktown, which marked the end of major fighting in North America. The revolution has been won. With the British recognition of an independent United States and the revolution concluded, Washington disbanded his army and resigned as commander-in-chief rather than seize power, proving his opposition to dictatorship and his commitment to American republicanism. It is said that the greatest act in his life was his resignation as commander of the armies. King George III called Washington the greatest character of the age because of this. Washington then presided over the creation of a new form of federal government for the United States. Washington was widely admired for his strong leadership qualities and was unanimously elected president in the first two national elections. Washington was not a member of any political party and hoped that they would not be formed, fearing conflict that would undermine Republican government. However, his closest advisors, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, formed two rival factions, setting the framework for the two-party system dominating American politics today. Hamilton, who was Secretary of the Treasury, had bold plans to establish the national credit and to build a financially powerful nation, and he formed the basis of the Federalist Party. While Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson was the founder of the Jeffersonian Republicans, and he strongly opposed Hamilton's agenda, favoring rural states' rights over a centralized government. Washington typically favored Hamilton over Jefferson, and it was mostly Hamilton's agenda that went into effect. Washington oversaw the creation of a strong, well-financed national government that maintained neutrality in the French Revolution, suppressed local rebellions, and won acceptance among Americans of all types. Washington's presidency established many precedents still in use today, such as the cabinet system, the giving of the inaugural address, and the title Mr. President. He worked to unify rival factions in the young nation while supporting programs to satisfy all debt, established a permanent seat of government, implemented an effective tax system, and created a national bank. In avoiding war with Great Britain, he guaranteed a decade of peace and profitable trade, despite intense opposition from the Jeffersonians. And although he mainly supported Hamilton's proposals, he remained nonpartisan, never joining the Federalist Party. After Washington served 2 terms as president, he resigned and gave an eloquent farewell address. He warned against foreign influence in domestic affairs and American meddling in European affairs, and against bitter partisanship in domestic politics. He also called for men to move beyond partisanship and serve the common good. He cautioned against permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, saying the United States must concentrate primarily on American interests. He counseled friendship and commerce with all nations, but advised against involvement in European wars and entering into long-term entangling alliances, while advancing the general idea of non-involvement in foreign affairs. The address quickly set future American policy. Washington's policy of non-involvement in the foreign affairs of the Old World was largely embraced by the founding generation of American statesmen, including John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. Although as the country matured and became the leading world power, his policy of non-involvement was largely abandoned. After his retirement, he returned to his home at Mount Vernon, where he focused on his plantation and other business activities. And although most Americans at the time assumed he was rich because of the well-known image of wealth and grandeur at Mount Vernon, nearly all of his wealth was tied up in land or slaves, not money. On a cold winter day, Washington spent several hours inspecting his plantation in snow, hail, and freezing rain. That evening, he ate his supper without changing from his wet clothes. He awoke the next morning with a severe sore throat and became increasingly hoarse as the days progressed, yet he still rode out into the heavy snow, marking trees that he wanted to cut on the estate. Sometime around 3 a.m. that Saturday, he suddenly awoke with severe difficulty breathing and almost completely unable to speak or swallow. For treatment, he was a firm believer in bloodletting, which was a standard medical practice of that era, which he had used to treat various ailments of slaves on his plantation. Physicians were called, and by the time that they finished their treatments and bloodletting, there had been a massive volume of blood loss. Half or more of his total blood content was removed over the course of just a few hours. Thus, Washington died at home around 10 p.m. on Saturday, December 14, 1799, aged 67. It is said that Washington's last words were, "'Tis well." Representative Henry Lee III of Virginia called him first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. He was revered in life and in death, and became an international figure for liberation and nationalism as the leader of the first successful revolution against the colonial empire. Had it not been Washington and his selfless cause for American democracy and freedom, the revolution might have never succeeded, and the nation of the United States of America never realized.